As a lover of books, I really appreciate JLF. I love JLF. I come here every year. I attend sessions.
The people, the vibrancy, the amount of different topics, the panels, the hospitality, the culture, everything. It's wonderful.
I feel a deep sense of satisfaction that the literary scene in India is so vibrant and so alive. We've had writers from 15 Indian languages and almost 30 international languages.
Jaipur Literary Festival is there so many brilliant things on at the same time that you can't choose what to go to. It's really fantastic. It's wonderful to be here.
People be able to just listen to the writers for what they're having to say and enjoy the festival.
It's a privilege to be here, and the diversity of the programming is great, and the standard of the debate is very high as well. We learn so much when we're on the panel, and we learn so much when we're in the audience too.
Absolutely live from Diggy Palace.
I'm coming from 2007. When I was 7 years, from that year I'm coming, and I love so much. I meet so many authors and it's like amazing.
It's really good to see the Jaipur youth, getting so excited for this.
Passion of the people on stage. They're inspiring all these people, such an incredible turnout to listen to all these people.
I've come to this bookstore 4 or 5 times, and every time I walk away with another book.
I've been to festivals all over the world, but I've never been to a festival that is anything like it. It is more enjoyable, more exciting, more vibrant, and it's free.
It crosses boundaries and limits and heritages, and that is brilliant.
All the speakers, they made us so much clear and love for the literature more and more, and they updated us that what's the new upcoming, and I'm thankful to JLF.
And it's nice to see so many, especially young people, interested in literature. It's amazing to see how many of them just keep coming back and sitting through all the panels and taking down notes.
It's a very great thing to have this festival in Jaipur. So we come here, we get a lot of knowledge, we can cluster our knowledge here. Around 6 sessions, in whether it's Samvad or whether in Charbagh, everything together. Isn't it wonderful for each and every one to experience this, especially the ones in school, to know that there is value in books and not always on the mobiles, sticking to it every time. Well, it is indeed the Kumbh of literature.
Very pleased with particularly how the performance poetry has gone. It's something I think we've been weak on in the past. We've had some very good sessions from the Arab world, some remarkable sessions from West Africa.
And what I love about JLF is that it makes space for poetry. Poetry is not often given as much time and love as it gets here.
Our duty, as we see it, is to bring the world to India and India to the world.
The only way to transform societies is through knowledge.
Welcome to a little bit of London that is forever Jaipur.
Dear friends and lovers of literature, here we are again with JLF at the British Library 2021.
It's a particular pleasure for me to come back to the British Library, which has been my office in London for many years, and where my books have all been written and researched, and it's very nice to see this end of my life sort of double back on it.
Our amazing writers, today more than any time, because of the way the digital age has taken over, we need you to be able to make sense of the past, divine the future, and perhaps set in context what we're going through at this very point of time.
Do you feel that Britain and India can best intersect culturally?
Well, we've been intersecting for a long time. It's not that we will have to intersect. If you look at our cultural and historical relations, we go back a long way.
That may be nations or cultures or religions or sexualities, class, culture, gender, race, all those things, that distance is somehow reduced or bridged because we're connecting at a very basic human level.
I believe in the ability to convey meaning by the written word is our superpower.
On behalf of Teamwork Arts and the British Library, we welcome you to this very, very special event in London, in person, at the British Library, JLF London. The rest of the program, and you can register at jlflitfest.org/London to allow yourself to be transported to a land of literature, ideas, debate, where we discover and debate aspects of fiction, environment, geopolitics, food, culture, history, religion, and spirituality. We thank our friends and supporters for always having our back and supporting us wholeheartedly. This year, we would like to specially thank our partners, Rajasthan Tourism, TRS, East End, ICICI Bank, United Kingdom, University of York, and British Council Wales for their support. Thank you. We would also like to take the opportunity to thank our partners, Aga Khan Foundation and Asma Khan, for their unconditional support. Asma, are you here? No. But thank you. Please join me in welcoming now Jamie Andrews, Head of Culture and Learning, British Library, to welcome you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mukalika. And wow, I can't believe we've done it. It's fantastic. And whether you're here with us in the British Library Theatre in London, or whether you're watching us online across the UK, across India, or wherever else, it's great to have you with us. We, with the British Library, we've been working with our friends at JLF since 2017. And those of you who remember what was the normal world will know that we would host JLF London across 3 days, across multiple stages, with flags and food and people, as Mukalika said, every June. We haven't been able to do that. We haven't been able to host JLF or really any of our live events programming on site for the last 18 months or so. So to see so many people back here in the theatre, it's something that's really very exciting and very special. But of course, while the venues across the world closed, both the British Library and JLF pivoted rapidly to a new online events model. And between us, JLF and the British Library, we've reached literally millions of people across the world with our digital programming during lockdown. And many of those, the overwhelming majority, are people who would never have been able to get to a physical venue. And so, as we bring audiences back into the library, it's very much a best of both worlds approach. It's brilliant to have people back, but we are broadcasting this live and it'll be available on catch up for the next 48 hours. We've got the special bonus virtual edition between the 24th and the 26th of September of JLF London, as Mukhalika alluded to, and certainly for the British Library events, really probably for the rest of the autumn and ongoing, we'll be doing events in the theatre but broadcast online as well. But then, yes, definitely next June we are doing everything we can, and we fully intend to have JLF back in all its glory, and we have big plans for that. Finally, just some thanks from me to all of my colleagues at the British Library, and especially our cultural events team, John B and colleagues, many of whom are here today. Of course, to Namita and William for as always, their brilliant programming. To our friends at Teamworks, who we've seen far too much of on screen and far too little of in person recently. We're really sorry that our friends at Sanjoy and his team can't be with us today, but we know they're here in spirit and indeed on the screen. And thank you most of all to you, our audiences on site and online, for coming back. So enjoy the sessions and welcome back to the British Library. Welcome back to JLF.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I think on behalf of Teamwork Arts, we'd also like to thank John and B and all members of their team for their continuous help and support. Unfortunately, Sanjoy Roy, Managing Director, Teamwork Arts, could not be here, but we have a video message from him.
Thank you, Dr. Mukhalika Banerjee, and thank you very much, our colleagues at the British Library. Good afternoon and welcome to each and every one of you. I wish we could have been there in person to receive you on the occasion of JLF London at the British Library 2021. Unfortunately, the best laid plans of mice and men are put to rest, and the travel restrictions continue to be in place between London and New Delhi. And we promise to be back next year in person and live to be there with you. As India steps into its 75th year and plans to commemorate in a very big way, it's time for us to perhaps look back and reflect on what's been achieved, what's been lost, what's been gained over this 7 odd decades that has gone behind us. We ourselves have seen so much of change. When I was born in the early 60s, life in India was very different. Our education systems were different, our schooling was different, the class system, the caste system, the religious divides, and so much more. Today, India is vibrant. It's a young demographic, they're hungry for change, there's innovation all around, there's energy, and there is a spirit to overcome, especially as we've seen during this COVID period. Even while the second wave devastated countless numbers of people across the length and breadth of the country, our vaccination program has really come up top notch. And more people have been lining up to get vaccinated. We have over 800 million people who have been vaccinated so far, and we're well on our course to ensure that the entire eligible population gets vaccinated by December or January of 2022. Having said all of that, there is still so many challenges out there. Global warming, climate change is devastating countless numbers of people. September this year had Delhi see one of the wettest months in the past 50 years. And can you imagine Delhi, which is supposed to be at the edge of the Rajasthan desert, has had floods which have been unimaginable. In the rest of the country, landslides, enormous flooding, overflowing lakes and dams, and at the same time, drought continues to be the bane of an ordinary person's life. In the economic world, what do we need to do? Do we need to continue to look at the growth of GDP? And if so, who does this impact and how does it affect the lives of the poor? Do we need to look at a new paradigm? how can we walk into this next decade or into the next 50 years, but walk together, hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder, taking together each and every one of our people. If India can bring about change, the world too can change, because we have one of the largest demographics in the world. Collectively, we can make and bring about change. And this is where literature plays an enormous role. The written word, innovation, ideas, all of this. Because writers are able to fathom the future, look to the past, make sense of it, and try and understand the challenges of the present. In our program for 2021, our festival directors, Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple, really laid out a fabulous program for you to see. Some live here at the Knowledge Center and at the Aisha Khan Center, and of course at Asma Khan's Darjeeling Express, but also digitally. We have been, over this last year, expanded our footprint enormously. Internationally today, our largest audiences continue to be from the United States, from the United Kingdoms, and more so now from China, which is at number 3, Indonesia, which is at number 5, Uzbekistan, which is at number 6, the wonders of the digital medium. In 2020, at our last live festival at the Jaipur, we had 500,000 people coming through our doors. In 2021, in our digital festival, we had more than 28.7 million people who viewed our 140 episodes. Similarly, in 2019 at the British Library, we had 14,000 people come through our doors and watch our sessions over 2 days. And in 2020, at the digital version, we had over 500,000 people who viewed our program. So COVID has had its advantages, but there's nothing to beat us being there upfront and personal with you, which we promise to be back in 2022. Enjoy the festival. Look forward to seeing you all.
Thank you, Sanjay. May those words come true. I would now like to invite the festival co-directors, Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple, to introduce the program. Namita, like Sanjay, cannot be here in person. She's in Delhi, so we have a video message from her too.
Lovers of literature, here we are again with JLF at the British Library 2021. Suspended as we are between worlds in the wonders of hybrid and extended reality and daily life. Greetings from New Delhi. How I wish I was there in London today. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the Republic of India, and India at 75 is woven through our theme. We are here to celebrate books and ideas, poetry and music, debate and dialogue. Literature provides contemporary answers to eternal dilemmas and also eternal answers to contemporary problems. The Jaipur Literature Festival, which has been called the greatest literary show on earth, is a library of life, or indeed a living library. This weekend and the weekend after will open windows to many worlds. We discuss the unraveling of the Afghan narrative with a distinguished and engaged panel. We have the essential Elif Shafak and other eminent literary voices in the first person feminine across cultures and continents. We have Jeet Thayil on the names of the women and Veer Sanghvi on a rude life. We search the soul of Sufi poetry and discover Damascus, lost cities, and unexpected mysteries with Parsi lawyers. We explore the taste post the pandemic, as well as the evolving history of Indian cuisine. We speak of ancient Hindu civilization and discuss the impact of empire on modern Britain. We dive deep into the wild waters with the octopus teacher. I speak of books and readers and my new novel, The Blind Matriarch. We have the brilliant Raven Lailani on her powerful debut novel, Luster. Do join us this weekend and next to share this rich diversity of themes and ideas. A heartfelt thank you for being with us, and to all our speakers and audiences and partners and the inspirational British Library that hosts us year after year. Thank you again.
Thank you, Namita, and I'm now delighted to present in person William Dalrymple.
Thank you, Mukalika. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you to the British Library. It's wonderful to be back, albeit in this slightly truncated form, an amuse-bouche rather than a multi-course feast. But there will be many more courses available online. Those of you who are here in person can encounter your main course, your entree, your puddings, your cheese, your port, or maybe your thalis and your gulab jamuns and many other delicious, tasty offerings online. The British Library remains an extraordinary place from which to project these discussions and these sessions. This year marks, as Sanjoy and Namita said, 75 years of Indian independence, and there's probably no place outside India where you could gather in one place the documentation for that period better than in the British Library. Even more so, the whole story of the independence movement, the struggles of Gandhiji and Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose and Jinnah and all the others on the path to independence. And then beyond that, allegedly, the British Library has 35 miles of documents of the East India Company sitting deep into the ground. I've never been allowed down there. I might try and get Jamie to give me the skeleton key at some point. But I have called up over 20 years many of the documents. And it's an extraordinary feeling sitting in the reading room at the top of the British Library, where I've worked for many years. And it's as if when you press your enter and you send off your request from the vaults, it's as if the whole of Indian history is sitting there sort of compressed down like a reverse TARDIS into a sort of into a tiny box. All the Durbars and parades and festivals and victories and defeats and looting and pillaging and all the other conspiracies and shenanigans and artistic masterpieces, all there sitting in the vaults to be called up at will. It's an extraordinary sensation just being able to order this stuff up and to read it in one place. And it makes it a very, very suitable session for us to examine both Indian history, Indian literature, and other manifestations of Indian civilization and culture here in the British Library. The pandemic has obviously taken its toll of all live arts everywhere in the world, but we were very quick onto live events and Zoom, and within 2 weeks of the lockdown, we had our Brave New World sessions, which, as Sandra just said, reached an astonishing 30 million viewers across the world in some very unlikely countries. Who knew that Uzbekistan took a close eye on Indian literature, but there we go. None of it, of course, quite matches the sensation of arriving at the Jaipur Festival proper. And those of you here are warmly invited next January, where we are attempting to put on a full festival again in Jaipur, albeit probably slightly smaller than usual. It should run, I don't know whether we'll get our usual figures of 500,000, but and the sensation of being in a kind of literary Glastonbury. But it is hopefully going to happen in person, and you are all warmly invited. Namita has already outlined the festival, but some of the events. But it is, I hope, a balanced starter course with some of the great names of Indian literature, particularly cutting-edge writers such as Jeet Tile, author of Narcopolis, Taran Khan, the new star of Indian travel writing, who won the big travel awards this year across the board. Also major writers from the region, such as Elif Shafak and Tamina Anam, as well as foreign writers who've dealt with India and Indian culture, such as Edmund Richardson, whose Extraordinary Alexandria is one of the great non-fiction successes this year. Kat Jarman, whose book on the Vikings amazingly traces an object found in a Viking grave in Derbyshire back to Ahmedabad as a measure of the trading links of the time. And finally, Kim Plofka, who is one of the great scholars on Sanskrit mathematics and the extraordinary world of zero, decimal place system, and so on, all the things that we take for granted that in Europe we tend to call Arabic numbers, but which of course originated in India and is one of the great gifts of Indian civilization to the world. Every time that we pull out our phones or open a computer keyboard and press a digit, we are using an Indian invention. I'm going to, I think, welcome straight on board now the Afghan session speakers. We have some, such as Saad and Shazia, here live. Others, such as Rory and Gautam, are sitting in the studio. One in New Delhi, one in Yale, but both, we hope, are awake and present. So, Shazia and Saad, if you want to come up to the stage, we will endeavour to bring the world together.
So just a brief introduction to our speakers on this panel. Rory Stewart is a senior fellow at Jackson Institute at Yale. Stewart was the UK Secretary of State of International Development, where he doubled the UK's investment in international climate and environment. He's the author of 4 books: The Places in Between, Occupational Hazards, or The Prince of the Marshes, Can Intervention Work, and The Marches. Saad Mohseni, co-founder and chairman of Mobi Group, has brought top-tier news and media content to emerging and frontier markets over the past 2 decades. Mohseni launched his first network in Afghanistan in 2002 and has developed Mobi Group into one of the fastest-growing diversified media companies in South and Central Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Shazia Haya Ahmadzai is an Afghan journalist who has not only just emerged from quarantine following her dramatic escape from Kabul, she has reported for the BBC's Pashto service and presented a Hard Talk television show, Open Jirga, from Kandahar in Taliban heartland earlier this year. Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay served in the Ministries of External Affairs and Defense of India and as India's ambassador to Syria, Afghanistan, where he also reopened the Indian embassy in Kabul after the ouster of the Taliban in November 2001 and Myanmar, respectively, from 2005 to 2016. He's also graduated from the National Defense College of India and worked in Afghanistan as a visiting fellow at Carnegie in Washington. He's currently Senior Visiting Fellow at the Center for Policy Research in New Delhi. William Dalrymple can be introduced properly. I'm sure you all know more as much as I do, but he's, of course, the best-selling author and has won many awards, including the Wolfson Prize for History, the Hemingway, the Thomas Cook, and the Duff Cooper Memorial Prize. His most recent books are The Company Quartet, in that very handsome set, The Anarchy, Relentless Rise of the East India Company, and Forgotten Masters, Indian Painting for the East India Company. William Dalrymple is, of course, one of the founders and co-director of the Jaipur Literature Festival. Please now welcome all of them to this panel, which many find
So what I propose to do is to start by talking to Saad and Shazia about what has happened in Afghanistan over the last month. Both were there in the immediate run-up to the Taliban takeover, Saad rushing in between trying to persuade Washington to take things more seriously, visiting the State Department and trying to turn the tide of history backwards, sadly, without much success. Shazia was sitting on the ground in Kabul and has only just made it to Britain and out of quarantine. So maybe to start with you, Saad, could you paint the picture? You were in and out of the presidential palace. You've known Karzai and Ashraf Ghani very well. You've been a major player in Afghanistan, helped set up the Tolo network and Mobi. Tell us what it was like the last days of the regime. Were they aware of what was happening? Was there a sense that this was inevitable, or were they living in another land of their own imagination?
Thank you, Will. Well, it was an accident happening in slow motion, and it was all avoidable. And this is the sad reality. I'm not going to dwell on whether it was the right decision to pull out or not. I will let Rory and Gautam talk more about that. But once the decision was made, actually even before that, there was I think it seemed inevitable that they would disengage. The question was how quickly. And what was obvious, and I've been going to Washington since 2002, is how they did not. They had this attitude of not wanting to engage. So I think I went to Washington on 3 occasions, the last one in late July. But the previous two occasions, I couldn't even get people to meet with me at the State Department and the White House. I mean, partly because key appointments had not been made or people had not been confirmed by Congress. But there was this feeling that they had had enough of Afghanistan, and they felt that there was no need for them to fully engage. Now, after the decision was made, and it's a monumentous decision to pull out after 20 years, you have to worry about the transition from US to Afghan forces. You have to think through how to evacuate translators and other people associated with not just the US, but international forces. But this lack of engagement was extraordinary. And I recall this discussion I had with a friend in Washington who said, they should be having bi-weekly meetings at the deputy principal's level and at the White House to manage this huge endeavor. And I recall George Packer writing about the translators in Vietnam, and this was probably in late April or early May, saying that what an important thing it was for the Americans to what they did post-Vietnam. They accepted 300,000 odd Vietnamese. And his worry was the White House. And he told me a story that in the 1970s, when they were attempting to get the Vietnamese out of Vietnam, there was one particular individual who stood against very firmly letting these people into the US. And that was a young Senator Joe Biden. Now, he eventually relented, but the fact that, a lot of people say, well, Joe Biden has no empathy. I mean, he certainly doesn't have much empathy when it comes to the Afghans, but it's not an age thing. He's always been like this, it seems. And George's concern, and I think he wrote for The Atlantic in early May, or it may have been late April, was that he would not care enough and do enough to get these people out. On the transition, I mean, it's, again, I don't want to dwell too much on it, but it's like giving the keys to the car and the car without any wheels. By deciding to leave and then telling all the contractors, you must leave as well, because we can't afford to have you killed or get kidnapped. They built a military in the mold of the US military, right? So reliant on contractors in terms of servicing and maintenance of equipment, logistics. Even the planning and of the military was handled by the US. And of course, they continued to receive air power. They took those 4 things away from them. And so
these weapon systems that basically cannot be operated without contractors?
No, but when the contractors moved out, they even took out missiles because as per their contracts with the US military, they had to even remove some of those missiles and software systems as well. So the Afghan, and of course every single day, Blinken or Biden or someone would announce, we're leaving, the translators are coming out. It's a bit like telling your partner, I think I'm going to leave you in the next 12 months, and then getting surprised that she leaves you the next week. So no one's going to fight for this government if they know they're going to get abandoned. So this was on the
this thing we read in the papers that when they abandoned Bagram, they left the vehicles on the ground but took the keys.
Destroyed them or left them on, left them there. And I mean, why would you leave? Why would you take out your military before you take out the civilians? And they were out by June, by the way. They were out by June. I mean, when you have these discussions today, the military did its thing, the intelligence guys were doing their own thing, the State Department is completely disconnected with what's going on. The majority of the translators apparently are still in the country. The banana merchant managed to get out, some truck driver from Peshawar managed to get out, because they were not checking documentation. So that's why the Americans right now, basically they have hostages inside the country, and this is the way they're negotiating with the Taliban. And it's going to be very difficult for them. But I just want to quickly talk about the Afghan side. I met with folks in the White House and the State Department. I flew into Kabul. I met with Ghani twice. And when I left Kabul, I said, there's no hope, because we're dealing with two inept, disconnected presidents, one in Washington, one in Kabul. Completely delusional, beyond belief. And I told you the story that I met Ashraf on the 24th, just before his call with Biden, and he had a stool in front of him. And being with Ashraf, as you and Rory know well, I'm not sure about Gautam, that you either get lectured or get screamed at. At least
both.
Well, at least you and I have not been called a donkey. Unlike Rory.
UPM on Afghan television with a split first with Ashraf Ghani calling you a donkey and then appearing with him live. Is that right? Or?
It was absolutely wonderful. If you can now hear me, Willie, it was a wonderful moment. He did an entire TED talk as part of his presidential campaign in which he called me a son of a donkey.
Oh, son of a donkey. That's
quite rude enough. But shortly thereafterwards, he then came to see me in London. I was the Minister for International Development, and I had to give him a £400 million check for Afghan development. So there was wonderful fun with the Afghan media cutting him calling me a son of a donkey and then politely sitting with me to take development aid.
I remember that trip. But anyway, so I went to see him and I explained to him that, that you need to bring some changes. And he had this stool in front of him, and I wasn't sure what it was for, but he then proceeded to say, do you mind if I stretch my legs? He's the president, what are you going to tell him? And he put his feet up, just, facing me.
Which in both India and in Afghanistan is
all
not
of
the
Asia,
way.
it's not the done thing. I don't care about those sorts of things, but I felt this man has no idea. And then the next day when I met him, he still had the stool next to him. But anyway, so I think throughout this presidency.
Give him a picture of this man. Karzai had, for all his flaws, had enormous charm, would welcome people in and operated a big tent. But Ashraf, you've always felt alienated people and was rude to them.
He was only good at one thing, alienating people, right? And he's a lonely man today. I suspect his wife is with him, but I think everyone else has abandoned him, including his closest aides. They're probably all over the world, but not in Abu Dhabi where he is. And the reason why the military, I think, fragmented was also because he completely politicized the Afghan National Security Defense Forces, but also regional power brokers, warlords, militia leaders, religious leaders. So when a battalion in the northeast is there, they rely on local support. And if they don't have that local support, they're not going to fight.
Before we come to Gautam and Rory, Shazia, maybe you'd just like to tell your story of the last week, your last weeks or days in Afghanistan, and how you left and how it was to come here.
Well, thank you. Hello, everyone. It's a great honor to be here. Actually, my story is so long. I don't know from where I should start. But first of all, I want to thank the British government for saving my life. Actually, thankfulness can never be enough, as a British government prevented me from dying there in Afghanistan. Well, my name is Shazia Haya. I am the daughter of my mother, Zebul Nisa. Actually, there in Afghanistan, nobody mentioned his or her mother's, sister's, or wife's name publicly. It's considered taboo, and I think that's the reason behind the lack of identities of women there in Afghanistan. But for myself, my identity in my mother's name, and I am proud of it. In my 6 years career in journalism, I reflected the voices of others, but today I want to speak for myself. I want to speak what I was going through just as a normal Afghan girl, not as a journalist, please, just as a normal Afghan girl. I want to speak about the tough life which I had in Afghanistan. With the fall of Kabul, the aspirations of Afghan people were destroyed. The day of collapse of Afghan government reached in Kabul, and the life of Afghan people was halted just as a sudden storm comes and destroys everything. Our life was also being destroyed, and we could do nothing about that. That much we were hopeless, and it really hurts. It really hurts. Please pray for Afghanistan. Please pray for the people that now they are in Afghanistan. I have fought for my rights against my conservative family, male-dominated society for years and years. Somehow I survived. I tried to make life there, but just in one day when I saw insurgents on the road in front of the building where I lived. So I was thinking with myself that, okay, Afghan women have fought for their rights in past 20 years against families, against society, but what about now? Now how Afghan women can fight when insurgents, when they're standing on the streets with guns. So on that moment, my old dreams vanished. It really hurts when you make a life for yourself, and just in one day, everything was taken from you, and you could do nothing about that. It really hurts. Let me tell you that Afghan women in past 20 years have really hard fought for their life, for their freedom, for their even more basic rights there in Afghanistan. Let me tell you how. The male members of my family were not in support of us pursuing education, but just by the support of my mother, I went to school. I was able to get 12 years of school education. And then again, those male members of my family wanted me to get married, but I struggled for my education. I got my bachelor's degree by my own money in Kabul. But for the first time when I entered to the world of media, my father, my brothers, my uncles, even some of them now live abroad and have a modern life, were against my job as a journalist. Even now, they're against my job. My father used to tell me that if somebody asks you that, who is your father, please do not mention my name, because I don't want that somebody knows. So this is the story of every Afghan woman.
Did that change because you were a senior presenter on Afghan television? Did your father become proud of you? No.
I had a hard talk show there in Afghanistan, and it was live in social media every day when I came to my home. So I had a hope that, okay, my father will come and will say something good about my show. And he came, and every day, oh, again, you were live on social media. Oh, again, people saw you. Oh, again, your relative will talk about you. So this was the story. We struggled, we fought, somehow we survived. But just in one day, everything was taken from us. Why? Why we should suffer that much?
Shazia, talk about the process of actually getting out of. You saw the insurgents on the road.
Yeah.
How did you manage to get to the airport? We also saw those pictures on the media of the Taliban stopping people getting into the airport and so on. Maybe tell your story.
Well, it was just like a movie. On 21st of August, 10 p.m., I received a call from FCDO, and they told me that I should go to the airport. So I wore burqa because I was working in TV, and I should hide my face. So I wore burqa. My father was not with me on that night. I called my father that I need a taxi or I need your support because I want to go to the airport. My father said that I can't help it because maybe my life is also in danger. So by my own self, I took a taxi, wore burqa, went to the airport. But on the way, I tried to enter first to the airport, but there was insurgents. So I request one insurgent that to let me in, but he shouted, he cursed me and said that go home. Actually, I said lie to him that inside the airport, my husband there, and he's waiting for me. I didn't say that I'm a journalist, please let me in. Inside there, my husband there, please let me in. He cursed me that, oh, in one day you find husband, stupid girl, go home. So I took side roads, and I contacted my some colleagues. They were already there near to the Bahrain camp. And with the help of one driver, I never forget him. I just told him that I will pay you, just help me in finding way, because I was there at 1 a.m. So I said that I don't know the way, just help me and find the way that I entered the Bahrain camp. He helped me, and thank you so much. I don't know where he is.
Entered to what, Bahrain?
Yeah, there was a side road in front of the Bahrain camp. Yeah. Yeah, near to the airport. Actually,
Barron Camp was
yeah.
the hotel that was run by the British military to do their evacuations from near the airport.
So I reached there. There were some colleagues, and then somehow with crowded. Somehow we made it, and we entered to the Bahrain camp, and then we show our ID, and the British troops helped us. So that was it. Yeah, thank you.
And then you got onto a plane, and what was it like arriving here? You'd never been to Britain before?
No. It's my first time here. Actually, now I have two birthdays. One when my mother gave birth to me, and the second one on the 24th of August, when I came to London. So I have two birthdays. Thank you.
Gautam, you had the great responsibility of opening the Indian embassy in Kabul after the fall of the Taliban. What does it feel like now personally for you, before we talk about the wider geopolitical picture, to see what's happening now?
Right. So, thank you, William, and good afternoon, and greetings to all my fellow panelists. Lovely to see them again. And great, I'm very envious of all of you who are actually sitting in the British Library. But let me go back to November 2001. November 2001, when we landed in Bagram. It was like a phantom airport. We had given our call signs, we had given notice to the US military as well as to the Afghan authorities at that time, which were the Northern Alliance. But there was no acknowledgement of the flight. And our aircraft circled the airport, and then the commander of the flight basically gave the orders to land. For about half an hour, there was no one to be seen. This was Ramzan that year, 2001. And the atmosphere was generally subdued, but I would say generally also extremely relieved and happy. There was not the kind of bursts of gunfire, the attacks at the airport that we saw in the transition from the Ghani government to the Taliban. So that was the most notable thing. The first gunfire that we heard was when actually Eid took place in December 2001, celebratory gunfire. So whereas the Islamic Republic was welcomed in due course, of course, 4 years down the line, 3 years down the line, with relief and with celebration, the new Taliban, what I call actually Taliban 3.0, and I'll explain that why, has been greeted with terrorist attacks at the airport that killed close to 200 Afghans, as well as a large number of US military forces. And that attack has been attributed to the IS, which means that there is a likely rift. I mean, there is a rift between the Taliban and the IS. What does it tell us about the future? So I think that is what is the main difference that I see. In 2001, the Taliban melted away, but there was no violence. Even Taliban 1.0 was not yet a terrorist force. It was an ultra-conservative religious militia led by a pious mullah. But 2021 is entirely different. What we have seen is the Taliban being more or less hijacked by the Haqqani network, which was a separate network that predated the Taliban, and assuming control over that. A Haqqani network that has known ties to the Al-Qaeda, that possibly, at least there are reports of links with the ISK, elements of the ISK. There are reports of other links between the IS and the LET and other elements of Pakistani intelligence. So what we are looking at is something that is a very complex phenomenon. We have, of course, what we have seen, an entire generation seeking freedom, seeking liberty that Shazia just spoke about. We have a resistance building up, a resistance that could take any number of ethnic fault lines. We have friction within the Taliban between different factions. We have possibly frictions coming up in future between the Taliban, elements of the Taliban and the ISI. And we also have this larger clash that is going on between the Taliban, involving also many other groups. There are close to 20 to 30 other groups, extremist, radical, and some terrorist groups involved.
Could you just say, I'm intrigued, because what you just said I haven't heard, that there are already signs of tension between the Taliban and the ISI?
Well, there have been some reports. By the way, I think the sense of grievance, the sense of chafing against the ISI has always been there, but they have never been able to express it in any action. If I give you the example, Mullah Baradar was caught in a sting operation and in jail in Pakistan for 8 years when he was virtually broken down physically and psychologically, only to be revived for the US Taliban talks. But we have never heard a whimper or a squeak from the Taliban about the mistreatment of Mullah Baradar. There were other commanders, serious commanders who were killed in Pakistani custody. Mullah Umar was dead for 2 years before his death was publicly revealed. We have never seen any complaint by the Taliban. Mullah Haibatullah has been unknown. The world has been dealing with Taliban spokespersons and at the most a deputy leader, Mullah Baradar. Where in the world have we had a kind of headless government to be, which finally surfaced only when Kabul was taken over? And even then, we have not yet seen Mullah Haibatullah Khunzada. Who is controlling the strings?
Do you think it's, in a sense, an optimistic sign that we've got such a completely unrepresentative government, which is entirely Pashtun, when the Pashtuns only make up 40%, which is all male, which is rural guys from the boonies, generally pretty ill-educated, and obviously no women, and very, very few minorities. Do you think that basically means it's a highly unstable government which will collapse, or is that too optimistic?
Values of what we generally regard as a kind of free world. Even as, there are other kind of constellations being made, which are largely in the Anglosphere. But quite apart from that, the fact is that there is going to be a resistance. The resistance may take some time. There will be a resistance against the repression that people are facing. 20 years, Afghanistan has changed, the demography has changed, a new generation has come into being. This is not 1996, 2001. When Afghanistan was completely isolated, it's much better connected now. But what complicates the story are two things. One is the fact that, that there are so many radical groups. You talk about the IS, but we shouldn't leave out the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, the Chechens, the Dagestanis, the Etim, the LET, the Jaish-e-Mohammed, Uyghurs, the Lashkar-e-Jangvi, the anti-Shia groups, the sectarian groups, the anti-minority groups, the Jundullah. We have this entire constellation which have all been fighting in the trenches with the Taliban for this moment, for the occupation of Afghanistan. They are an alien force, an alien ideology. They have an Afghan face, but their brains are brainwashed by Pakistan, and there are Pakistani hands behind it. So now it's complicated by this sort of potpourri, or let's call it a kind of a conglomerate of extreme forces, which will fight for the jihad, but will also simultaneously fight for the jihad inside the country, which is to remove all vestiges of what they call foreign occupation, but also who will fight amongst themselves. So the resistance will have to face, it's not just going to be resistance against the Taliban. It's a much more complicated picture that we will see.
Gautam, I'm going to come back to you to ask about the specifically Indian perspective on what's happened in a second. But first to Rory. Rory, from the point of view of this country, Shazia has been very generous and thanked the British government for saving her. But do you feel this is one of the more shameful moments in our history, the way we've abandoned our allies?
I think it's very, very sad. I think Britain has behaved badly. I think the United States has behaved very badly. It's partly a revelation of British weakness. I mean, it turns out that actually Britain was really along for the ride and had a very limited capacity to operate independently. It didn't seem to be able to imagine even keeping quite a light footprint on the ground with German and French allies. You would have thought sustaining 2,500 soldiers should have been something easily within the gift of the non-US bits of NATO with a little bit of US support. You didn't need American boots on the ground. So in a sense, the whole of NATO needs to share in its humiliation and horror and not put it all on the United States, although it was, of course, Biden who pulled the rug out. Do
you feel that with a different leadership in Downing Street that it would have been possible for some sort of British force to have stayed in alliance with other NATO allies?
Yes, if the government had been serious about Afghanistan,
not body surfing on holiday.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a sort of bigger, deeper problem though in British foreign policy. I think it is true that I don't see the Boris Johnson government as a particularly serious government or particularly interested in foreign policy, but there's a deeper problem, which is that Britain is out of the habit of thinking about acting on its own or really taking responsibility for these events. Had they wanted to, 2 years ago, really taken seriously the possibility that Trump and Biden meant to do this, of course they could have worked with France, Germany, Turkey and others to bring together a force to replace the United States, and they perhaps could have asked Biden to leave certain enablers in place while he removed his troops. They didn't do that, and I think that shows the weakness of the alliance. But if I may, Willie, just one sort of bigger point, because obviously there are many people on the stage who don't have much time, but it seems that one of the central problems that we're now facing is around narratives about Afghanistan. So as Gautam has said, this is essentially a defeat for a particular democratic project. And what we're now seeing is many, many journalists, particularly in the United States, Anand Gopal, and increasing articles in the Washington Post and elsewhere, suggesting that the real Afghanistan is represented by the Taliban-dominated areas of the South. So they write about places like Sangin district in Helmand, and they try to suggest that the Taliban victory has brought great benefits to those areas by bringing peace and ending a war, and essentially suggested that nothing was achieved in 20 years, that if you go to these rural areas, nothing had changed. I think this has to be challenged because the reality is many things changed in rural Afghanistan. Sangin is one of the most extreme difficult parts of the country, and it should not be used as a representation. Herat, many of the areas around Mazar, certainly Hazarajat, Bamiyan, Shamali Plain, Panjshir Valley, huge progress in those rural areas. Life was immeasurably better than it was under the Taliban, and we cannot allow to remain unchallenged this narrative that somehow the only benefits of 20 years were felt in Kabul and that everything outside was some vision of hell.
Before we go on to that very interesting question, I will come back to this. How long have we got, incidentally, B? We got roughly 10 more minutes. 10 more minutes. So just a very brief answer. How tarnished is that whole project now of trying to promote democracy? Is it dead in the water, this idea that we can come to a country that's had some tyrannical or insurgent force and encourage them to go to the ballot box and have a liberal democracy? Is that idea, which was so much put about after 9/11, is that dead in the water?
I think so, but even worse, even the idea that we can do a humanitarian intervention of the sort that we did in Rwanda, or should have done in Rwanda and did in Bosnia, is now basically dead in the water. So this is actually quite dangerous because there will be many places in sub-Saharan Africa and the Sahel where there is an argument for the international community getting involved, and there are useful things the international community can do if it approaches them sensibly and with a light footprint. The problem is that what we've revealed in our politics is we seem to either go in too hard, try to do too much, or we give up and do nothing at all. We've lost any sense of moderation.
I'm going a very brief answer, and I'll take this then to Gautam again. How far do you think history will look back on this as the end of America's imperium? That this great period when American bases were all over the world expanding after 9/11 has now changed to a period of Chinese hegemony. That this is now, that Afghanistan is now going to become, for all that we've got this mullah government, all Pashtun mullah government in Kabul, but the real development there is going to be done by China. It's going to be Belt and Road. We're going to see the Chinese extract mineral resources, and this whole era of American domination is over. Would you agree with that or not?
Yes, actually, when we talk to our American colleagues now, they tend to go out of the way to say America is not going anywhere, it's still there, and they hark back to Saigon and say, well, since Saigon, America has been there, and America will continue to be there. But when I look back, and I was in the division that dealt with the Soviet Union when it cracked up, the departure of the Soviet troops led to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the entire Soviet bloc. I won't say that the departure of US troops will lead to a similar state, but definitely it will be a very wounded United States. It's already facing internal challenges, even challenges to its own democracy. And that was another reason why, in fact, it should have supported democracy elsewhere.
Rory,
I see in the House, may I complete this?
Please do.
William, yeah. And what we are seeing in its place, that we had a certain alignment, which was democratic Afghanistan, the United States West, the democratic world, including India, during this entire 20-year reconstruction period. Now that is replaced by a Taliban supported by Pakistan, reinforced by China, and then the other powers that are aligned around this, Russia and Iran, can hardly be called, let's say, flag carriers of freedom, democracy, and liberty. So we see that, and we see in the Auskus actually a kind of fallback onto an Anglosphere. So there's a complete shrinking of democratic space, and the authoritarian, dictatorial, you have Myanmar on the other side of the subcontinent. You basically see a kind of progress of the authoritarians, or even the populist democracies, the democracies that are tending towards authoritarianism.
Thank you, Gautam. Rory, is this you were born in Hong Kong? Is this now the period of Chinese hegemony that we've been seeing rising? Is this their moment now?
I think it'll feel very different. I don't think we can anticipate China being drawn into nation building. I mean, China isn't interested in doing that. But I very much agree with Gautam's basic idea that something very strange has happened. Authoritarianism and new forms of populism are now dominant, and it's extraordinary. I mean, that movement, if you think about the movement from 1989 to about 2004, where the numbers of democracies in the world exploded, and then stalled, and has now begun to go dramatically backwards. And that's not something that any of us really anticipated 15 years ago. And that's partly, of course, about the rise of China. I mean, in 2004, the British economy was still bigger than the Chinese economy. The Chinese economy is now 7 times larger than the British economy, and that's happened in 16 years.
That's an extraordinary figure. Saad, do you see your television station staying open? What's the future for you and Moby? Are you optimistic or not?
Well, I'm not optimistic, and I'm also not pessimistic. As Gautam said, too many things can happen in the weeks ahead. There are too many unknowns. We continue, and we'll continue, whether it's from inside of Afghanistan, from outside of Afghanistan. The country, as Rory put it so well, has changed. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Afghanistan is a transformed country. That's why it's a bit disappointing to see the world disengage, because what was a stalemate to you was precious to us. People like Shazia was working. There are lots of other women going to university, and this youngest country outside of sub-Saharan Africa, median age of 18, 65% under the age of 22 or 23. It's a different country. We just needed more time. Is it too late? I don't think so, but I think the world needs to continue to at least care.
Shazia, what future do you see for your friends and family left in Afghanistan?
Well, it's complicated. Just you can observe the current situation in Afghanistan. Today, girls are banned. They are not allowed to go to schools. So you can imagine that what will be their future in Afghanistan. And there's just one question that Afghan women want to ask from the world, that do they deserve such a life in Afghanistan? Do they? So that's it. Yeah, thank you.
Mukalika, Namaz, who himself has come out of Kabul in the last few days. Can we have a microphone for Namaz?
Thank you very much. I'm Yamaz Zafari. I'm a Shiving scholar who made it this year with all the difficulties. I also came on the same day that Shazia came on 24th of August with all crossing the Barren Gate and all the things. And you know, we're lucky because after 2 days or a day after that, a blast happened. So you could imagine how we feel and how we made it. I would like to thank Ruth Stewart for making it happen and listening our voice and making this year happen for Shiving scholars. So I would like to owe him a big thanks. And so my question is from Saad, what is that we're not learning? It's been 40 years in our country there's war. We have not learned what was our mistake. At least we need to learn what is our mistake. And our elders should tell us what is that we are doing continuously wrong so that we should not do it again. And we convey that one message to our children so that they should not do that. You see, in 20 years, our leaders enjoyed the glory of state. The armored vehicles, the castles, everything, the VIP life. But you have seen the president was also the first one who fled the country. Though 2 months back he said, I will not abandon the army, I will not abandon the country, I will not abandon the nation. But he was the first one who abandoned. And Shahza, you rightly said about the women education. It's not about women, it's about 50% of your population who are women. So it means 50% will know more development. As a father, if you ask me, I mean, it's a tactical thing they're pitching in, that primary schooling will be there, it means until class 6, and no more schooling will be there. That means automatically saying no to education, because if my girl studies until 6, she would love to continue the education and doing bachelor and master. So that means how will I tell her when she will be 11 or 12 that you should not go to school anymore? It's really too difficult. So tactically they're bringing, finishing the value of Afghans. 50% of your women, your population cannot join. They just changed the ministry name, Ministry of Women Affairs. You could see your representation is no more there. So that is the scenario.
Become the Ministry of Vice and Virtue now.
Yeah, you see. And then, the discussion was on democracy. I mean, your best partner who were US, after 20 years, they're saying that we're not there for nation-state building. So one of the pillars of the democracy is nation-state building option. They say we're there for military intervention.
Let's get Saad's answer. So what is Afghanistan doing wrong?
Well, I think we don't have enough time to discuss all the things that went wrong, but obviously corruption and the ineptitude of the state didn't help. I think the heavy-handedness of the U.S. military didn't help.
The drone strikes,
the drone strikes, the airstrikes, and I think that there was a real disconnect between the state and the people. As I think you pointed out, President Karzai was a lot more connected, but Ashraf Ghani in particular had no idea. I once asked him, I said, do you watch the news? He goes, I don't have enough time to watch the news. He said, but I get the transcripts. I said, but you don't get the emotions of a mother screaming because her son has been killed. President Karzai, the interesting thing was that he would ask, this is before YouTube, he'd ask for DVDs of programs, of the news stories, as people would call us up and would deliver it to the palace. But we all made mistakes, including us. And I think we have to acknowledge all these things. And we're going to have plenty of time for post-mortems to see as to what we did wrong. And sadly, this government is already doing things wrong, this new government.
Lady at the back, where are you? There we go. Very good.
Sorry. My name is Aisha Khan, and I was in Kabul shortly after the fall of the Taliban, at the time when they were establishing the interim government. And I recall, now I'm not sure if this was hearsay or if it was fact, but I do recall that Zahir Shah had come to Afghanistan during that time. And I wonder from my Afghan friends and colleagues what they think if the West had engaged Zahir Shah at that time, who was known...
This is the king, yes?
The king,
Yeah.
yes.
Saad, do you want to answer that? What would have happened if we'd brought back the royalty?
Well, I mean, I know his grandsons, we know the family very well. They're not the most competent people either. So a royal system, and I'm not an anti-monarchist or anything, but I don't think it would have worked in Afghanistan. He was a wonderful human being. He was in his 90s. He was a true patriot. He was a good, symbolic figure, and that's what he remained till his death. I don't think that would have been the solution either.
Moin, last question for you. We've got just 2 minutes.
The truth is that the Taliban is there, for some time now. Do they have any sense of a vision? What are they going to do next? Do they have a strategy in place? They are reaching out economically to China, I think even to people in Geneva. But is there, in your minds, what would be the next steps that the Taliban would take to at least keep this country, united or in some form take the first steps to progress? What do you think are the next steps?
Just on the economic stuff, because we've got the political crisis and the humanitarian crisis. We have a major drought, 700,000 displaced individuals inside the country. The world gave Afghanistan $8.5 to $9 billion last year. That works out to be about $25 or $30 million a day. The Taliban have no idea what this economic crisis is going to look like. They get excited because the Chinese have given them $15 million in kind, not in cash, in kind. That's going to last us half a day. So even, I explained to one of these pro-Taliban sympathizers, this $6.5 billion TAPI project, the gas pipeline project between Turkmenistan and India, once it's completed, $6.5 billion is going to generate $200 to $300 million a year for the Afghan state. It's nothing. I don't think they quite realize what they're facing. They're not sophisticated. They're not worldly. They're arrogant. They have just prevailed. They've beaten the world power, superpower, the superpower, and no one's going to fill that vacuum. And the tragedy is that they're not going to pay the price. It's the Afghan people going to pay the price.
Gautam, just a 30-second answer just to finish. We are an Indian festival. What is the hopes of Indian relations with Afghanistan now? I mean, do you have relations with the Taliban, or is it now a question of starting again from scratch?
Pretty much starting from scratch. Actually, so far the contacts have been purely limited to security issues. I see the world actually resigned to the fate of Afghanistan, and the world is by and large talking about engagement. I feel that whatever engagement should be there should be minimal and basically focused on the people-to-people contact, humanitarian efforts for the people of Afghanistan. I wouldn't interrupt trade because I think that also is an important component, but relations with the government at an absolute minimum. And most of it negotiated and done through the United Nations.
Thank you very much. Oh, there is one more question.
From Grace Lee. Thank you for this session. What can British citizens do to help those in Afghanistan?
What can British citizens do to help those in Afghanistan? Shazia.
Just raise your voice for Afghan people, please. You can do everything for Afghan people now they're in Afghanistan. They really need your support, please. I really mean it.
So to those who say to break relations and to punish the Taliban by cutting off aid, is that a mistake?
Well, I don't know, but I can't say, but just now, what they need, Afghan people, they really need support from the world. There are humans. They want a normal life, just you guys have. They need to survive there in Afghanistan. Yeah.
Rory. Rory, was that you?
Can I move very quickly on this? I think it's central not to be naive about the Taliban, not to embrace the Taliban, but at the same time understand that we need to get development and humanitarian assistance into ordinary Afghan people. It would be madness and very cruel to punish ordinary Afghans in the mistaken belief that was somehow going to change the behavior of the Taliban themselves. It is perfectly possible to find a way of providing support to the Afghan economy without being naive about the Taliban, and we should do that.
Thank you very much. I think this is exactly why we have JLF. This extraordinary panel today was one of the very best sessions we've ever had. Gautam, thank you. Thank you, Rory, Saad, and particularly Shazia. Welcome to London.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for a fantastic discussion. What a privilege to hear such a variety of perspectives and voices, but ultimately I think the message is the same. Support the Afghan people without condoning or legitimizing the Taliban. I think that's the message. Now it remains for me on behalf of Teamwork Arts, JLF, to thank you all and to thank our fantastic panelists for an amazing panel. Thank you.
Welcome to a little bit of London that is forever Jaipur.
Dear friends and lovers of literature, here we are again with JLF at the British Library 2021.
It's a particular pleasure for me to come back to the British Library, which has been my office in London for many years, and where my books have all been written and researched, and it's very nice to see this end of my life sort of double back on it.
Our amazing writers, today more than any time, because of the way the digital age has taken over, we need you to be able to make sense of the past, divine the future, and perhaps set in context what we're going through at this very point of time.
Do you feel that Britain and India can best intersect culturally?
Well, we've been intersecting for a long time. It's not that we will have to intersect. If you look at our cultural and historical relations, we go back a long way.
That may be nations or cultures or religions or sexualities, class, culture, gender, race, all those things, that distance is somehow reduced or bridged because we're connecting at a very basic human level.
I believe in the ability to convey meaning by the written word is our superpower.